Hello. I feel I've not done a great deal in terms of responding to comments recently, so here's one. And the comment is about the religious approach to conscription. And it's from Joseph Schultz. It says the problem is always going to be the human religious impulse and the deification of those that don't deserve it. That incidentally means no deification of anything existent or non-existent, and that includes national states. Of course, I'm afraid I directly oppose that idea because as a member of the Orthodox Greek Church, I subscribe to the principle of theosis, which is that we are in the process of becoming godly all the time, whether we like it or not. Resist as much as you wish. It's not going to be any value. We are getting better and better. Now, of course, we look around, and that doesn't seem to be the case. But there's a difference between what we can hope for and what we can perhaps achieve. And I don't think, unless we set our goal at the very top, we're not going to achieve anything. So our goal is perfection. We have to recognise that we may not achieve it, and we may fall quite far short. But when it comes to military conscription, is it a moral duty, a civic necessity, or an archaic coercion rooted in ideological subjugation? So if you look at the religious traditions and you look at the philosophical traditions of antiquity, and try to be as radical and as modern as possible, the notion that the human impulse for deification, whether gods or nation states, perpetuates the very conflicts that we seek to mitigate. I don't quite understand how that works, except that we are raising people and ideas up beyond the point at which they can sustain respect. And I have no desire to deify Trump or Putin. I think we have a duty to respect those people who give their lives for their country, and that's about as far as it goes. So I think the deification thing is a little bit of an irrelevance. But religion has served as the moral bedrock for many societies, shaping attitudes towards war, towards obedience, towards duty. And the degree to which religious doctrines support or challenge military service varies considerably. St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas developed the just war theory, arguing that war can be just if it serves a rightful cause, if it's declared by a legitimate authority, is conducted ethically. And I think from that point of view, Ukraine's resistance to the invasion by Russia is just. Romans 13, 1-7 exhorts believers to obey governing authorities, while Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," which suggests an alternative pacifist tradition followed by groups such as the Quakers, but also, I think, followed by anybody who desires peace. The fact that war is happening doesn't mean people don't want peace and aren't actively pursuing peace. If we accept that obedience to a government is a divine duty, conscription becomes justifiable, I suppose. But if we lean towards the sanctity of life, we might ask, can a state compel an individual to kill in defiance of their personal conscience? Islamic doctrine recognizes war as a necessity under certain conditions. The Quran in Surah 2 says that we must fight in the way of Allah, those who fight you, but don't transgress. It's very specific. The notion of the jihad of war, misconstrued often in modern discourse, is revealed as a form of struggle encompassing both the spiritual and the defensive warfare. But when it comes to the jihad of the sword, it's about defense. It's about protecting the community. And under Islamic thought, military service can be a collective obligation, or in times of direct threat, an individual duty. But this immediately confronts the issue of state legitimacy. What if the so-called legitimate authority is itself illegitimate? and that then becomes a serious problem. Jewish law acknowledges military duty, but it also provides for conscientious objection. Deuteronomy 25:8 exempts men who have built homes, planted vineyards, or recently married. The Mishnah further allows exceptions for the fearful, recognizing psychological and moral objections. And therefore Judaism integrates duty with human frailty. And of course, behind that lies the concerns and the worries about conscripting the Hasidic community into the army. In Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita presents this moral dilemma before battle with Krishna, urging the idea of fighting as a dharma, as a duty. And the warrior class is bound to protect society. But Hinduism also elevates non-violence, as for example championed by Mahatma Gandhi. And the paradox is stark. Duty demands service, but enlightenment may demand refusal. When you come to philosophy, that same paradox is present again and again. In Plato in the Republic, Plato argues that a society needs a specially trained guardian class to protect it and in order to maintain order. But he doesn't advocate universal conscription, preferring a professional warrior class over amateur soldiers. Military service, in his view, is a structured necessity, but one that should be delegated to those fit for the task. Aristotle in the Politics sees military service as an integral part of the virtuous life, and the best government, he argues, ensures military training for all citizens to maintain self-sufficiently. But he warns against tyranny, where military service becomes a tool of oppression rather than of civic virtue. It's a necessity, not something that is desirable. The Stoics, particularly Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, thought that one should accept one's role in society. A Stoic conscript doesn't fight for glory but for duty. Yet if conscription is demanded for an unjust cause, should he or she not then resist? This echoes the internal moral debate of conscientious objectors. The Cynics, particularly Diogenes of Sinope, reject the social constructs that demand conscription and military duty, and to the Cynic, conscription is an absurdity. Why should one die for a state that is itself an artificial construct, they would say. Returning to the opening issue, one might argue that military conscription is at its core a mechanism of deification, not of God, but of the state, and the religious impulse originally directed at the divine has been repurposed to glorify nations and leaders. And as the source says, nationalism is a deification shift of that impulse. If we perpetuate the worship of states and their leaders, be they Trump or Putin or any demagogue, we bind ourselves to cycles of bellicosity, to cycles of war, justified not by necessity but by the reverence of power, the reverence for power itself. And we see this in the rhetoric surrounding conscription throughout history. To die for one's country is framed as a sacred duty. And Dulciet decorum est, the poem, if you actually saw what that duty involved, you wouldn't be crowing about it. But should we not question why the state demands this sacrifice? If we strip away the reverence, does conscription remain a moral duty, a moral obligation, or does it stand as some sort of coercion masked in patriotic piety? Religious and philosophical traditions provide a complex, often contradictory view of military conscription. While some frame it as a duty in Christianity, in some forms, most forms of Christianity, in Islam, in Hinduism, in Plato, in Aristotle, others emphasize conscientious objection in Judaism, in Stoicism, or reject it outright in cynicism in the Pacific traditions, particularly in Christianity of the Quaker traditions. But if we accept the premise that the problem is always going to be the human religious impulse and the deification of those who don't deserve it, as the comment suggests, then the true task before us is not refining conscription policies, but dismantling the structures that necessitate them. If nationalism is merely a secularization of religious devotion, I think it's an interesting idea. It's not one I've thought of before, really. Then the path forward lies in what Joseph, I think, calls culturally out-evolving it. And this requires a shift in perspective, away from unquestioned obedience to state and leader and towards an ethical framework grounded in reason and genuine cooperation. Military conscription, in its current form, is the vestige of an era where loyalty to power superseded the value of human life. And the challenge before us is whether we remain prisoners of that legacy or whether at last we break free, and whether there is a better way to look towards defending the things we hold dear. And I'm thinking particularly here of the many people in Ukraine who think they're doing something better than being conscripted into the army, and they may well be. And I'm also thinking of the many people who do not approve of the Russian invasion in Russia and have avoided conscription there as well. And I think there are many things that a person can offer beyond wielding a gun in defence of their country. And given the huge amount of effort which is now being piled into cyber warfare and conflict on the internet, there are many things that people can do simply from the safety of their own home to protect their country, and maybe that is something that we should be thinking about. What do we do to nurture peace? I think one has to stop thinking about going to war. I think one has to start thinking about how do we nurture peace, and sometimes that may well be by fighting, but most of the time it's about trying to promote peacefulness, and we do that by example.